Good morning, everybody. We are going to go back over science this week because we had a few mishaps with it last week. So, if you were able to get your science workbook to work online, that is awesome. If you weren't able to, then we are going to go over it together. Okay? So, if you were able to get it done, we'll have new things to talk about tomorrow. But today, we are going to talk about what I posted last week, so hopefully it'll work. So we're just going to go through it together, and then I will post a discussion board for the question you should type in, and I will post a poll for the multiple choice question, okay? So hopefully you'll be able to hear the video, but we'll watch this together.
Watch the cars as they are moving on the roads. Observe how the cars move from one road to another. What helps the cars make these changes?
Okay, so we are working, like last week, we're working on engineering this week. So right now I want you to be thinking about this video. So how do we get the cars to move on ramps like that? So our next one.
How could you keep a wagon or stroller from rolling away when you let go of the handle? Download your worksheet and investigate to find out.
So we're not going to do the worksheet now, but I do want you to think about it because I will post a discussion post on it. So how do you think you can stop a wagon from rolling away? If we were on this hill, if this was us, this little boy here, and we let go of our wagon, how could we get it to stop? So I want you to think about that. How could we do that? Our next one, we're going to look at our vocabulary. So our first one is engineer. So we have a picture here. Engineer, a person who uses math and science to define and solve problems. And anybody can be an engineer. We're learning how to be an engineer through this unit. Our next one is design process, which is a set of steps that helps an engineer define a problem and plan, test, and share a solution. Our last one is solution. Our last one on this page is solution, an answer to a problem. So like for our wagon, we're trying to come up with a solution. How can we get it to stop? Our next one is strength, a good feature, and weakness, a flawed feature. So as you can see in the pictures, this building of it looks like spaghetti noodles and tape is holding up really well. It's strong. And this one for weakness is falling apart. It's flawed. Okay, our next page.
How were these robots put together? Have you ever followed a similar process? As you explore, you'll find out how a design process can be used to solve many problems.
So as engineers, we're trying to think of ways to either help things or how things were created and put together. So you're thinking right now, like if we look over at this robot, how was this created? How do they get it to move? How do they get it to light up? All sorts of questions like that. So as a scientist and an engineer, we're always thinking. So our next one says, a ramp is a flat surface with one end higher than the other end. People use ramps to solve problems.
A ramp is used to load and unload an airplane. Without a ramp, people would have to lift and carry each heavy box and package. With a ramp, people can push or roll down each load. That's so much easier.
So that video tells us one way that ramps are really helpful, how people use them. Let's look at this video.
A ramp can make transportation simpler too. Instead of navigating stairs or lifting heavy chairs, a ramp allows anything on wheels to roll up and down with ease.
So that video, it was a little hard to see because the words were blocking it, but in that video, a woman was pushing someone in a wheelchair up on the ramp. That makes it a lot easier for people or other things to be transported. So let's look at our next page. So this will be our discussion board, okay? So on Power School, I will post our discussion, which says, can you solve it? How can a ramp solve a problem? So you are going to type your answer. I would like 1 to 2 sentences about how a ramp can solve a problem. And in our video, we just saw at least 2 ways. So I want you to try and come up with something.
By the end of this lesson, I will use the steps of a design process to define and solve a problem.
So this is our I can statement. So by the end of our lesson, we should be able to use the steps of the design process to define and solve problems. And our next one is what engineers do. So what exactly do engineers do? So engineers plan and build many things. We're going to watch this video to find out a little bit more about what they do.
Engineers solve many kinds of problems, from building dams and skyscrapers to exploring space, to making sure that electricity works in your house. They use math and science to solve all these problems. While engineers solve very different problems, they use a similar set of steps, called a design process, to do so. A design process helps to define a problem, to find and test a solution, and finally, to share a solution with others.
Okay, so we know that whenever engineers have a problem that they need to solve, so it could be they have maybe somebody's working on a plane and they have a lot of suitcases or luggage that they need to get on board. So how can they solve that problem? Instead of carrying every bag by themselves, like we saw in the video, maybe they use a ramp. So our engineers, they always use the design process to figure out what steps they need to take to solve the problem. So an
engineer uses math and science to define and solve problems, such as how to get to the top of a tall building or how to cross a river. Engineers may solve different problems, but they always use a similar set of steps called a design process.
We'll learn what the design process is.
A design process is a set of steps that helps engineers define a problem and plan, test, and share a solution with others. A solution is an answer to a problem.
There we go. So we'll look at each step. So design process, we look at step 1. Here, I'll close these off. So step 1 in the design process, so anytime engineers have a problem, we need to figure out. So let's see, step 1, it says choose each step to find out about a design process. Define a problem, plan and build. Then our next page, we have test and improve, redesign, and communicate. So I know it says step 1, 2, and 3, but so if we started here, so define a problem. So the scientists or the engineers need to figure out what is the problem first. And once they figure out what the problem is, then they can decide how they're going to plan and what or how they're going to build. So that's step 2. Then we come to step 3, which is test and improve. So when engineers build something or they plan something, it might not always work as they want it to. So things can always go wrong or just not work how we expect them to. So that is when the engineers are going to test it and they're going to make it better if they need to. Then step 4 is to redesign. So if something didn't work and they tested it and now they've improved it, they're redesigning just to make it better. And then their last step is to communicate. And then we have, so this will be our poll. So I will have you, our question is, what do engineers do? So on our poll on Power School, you'll choose either A, work in an office every day, B, use math and science to define and solve problems, or C, follow a design process. And then
You have just finished What Engineers Do.
And that is our last section for today. And then tomorrow we will go over our next section. And until we can get our science books to work, this is how we'll do it. I'll lead you through the book, and then we will, I'll either post discussion boards or polls, or just however it tends to work. So make sure you check out Power School to see your assignments.